Yuri, it's snowing outside. You see that snow? Probably can't see through the window. So, cold air mass came in. We got to talk about some air masses. It's the reason why we have snow today. It's the reason why weather happens. Wherever the air comes from, that's the characteristics of the weather that we'll get in New York State. There's only a few different types. They determine the fronts, tornadoes, hurricanes, the other things that we're going to start to have some our next videos on. Okay, got a really crude animation here. Got a box of cake. You don't need cake for air mass. So we got a little low pressure system here. And what happens is you'll get some warm air, like my artwork there, it's colored in red. Warm air starts to move this way. Okay, it comes in from the south. That's the source of the warm air. And everything's spinning around the low pressure this way. So the warm air comes from the south and it gets spun around that way. And the cold air starts to come in. I even tried to use my art skills to make some sort of front symbols on these. You can see the front of the warm air has that kind of bumpy surface, and the front of the cold air has that pointed surface. And as the cold air comes from Canada and it's going around the low, and the warm air comes from usually Mexico or the Gulf of Mexico, it's going around the low, and the cold air moves faster, and that's why we get those fronts moving across the country. So the two different types of air masses, there's really kind of four that we talk about, main types of air masses. Okay, where do they come from? And go over that. So if we look at a picture of the United States, all right, you can see there's basically, the north is cold and the south is warm. So the four types of air masses, you've got the two polar air masses, continental or maritime. Maritime means ocean. That was as close of an animation as I could get to the ocean there. So maritime means ocean, moist. Air is either going to be moist or dry. It comes from the land or it comes from the water. Okay? And then air is either going to be warm or cold. It comes from up north in Canada, or for us, or it comes from down south, the Mexico, Gulf of Mexico region. So there's the four types of air masses. You can label them those four things. You've just got to think in your head, is it dry or wet? Is it warm or cold?
Please pardon this interruption.
I did kind of intentionally leave out one. If you go super north, that's called continental Arctic. And then you just match up where did that air come from, and it's going to have those characteristics. Other words, they could use any different word to talk about, is it dry or wet? So wet would be like moist or humid. Dry would be arid or not moist. Pretty straightforward stuff. So we'll do a few questions with that. And so this is about as hard as a question as they could ask. It's a short answer question. You've got to label 6 different air masses. What could they possibly be? Now remember, you can look these up in your ESRT. That's a separate video that we'll do. But which air mass is which? Again, it's a little unfair that you have to get all 6 right just to get your 1 point on the test, but that's the way that it goes. So on the side over here, if I was you on my test, I would write down my possible options. So I can basically turn this into a multiple choice question. So take a second and see if you could do that. There's our possible options that we can label each of these with. So I'm over here and I'm thinking, is it over land or water? That's the first thing that I'm deciding between, continent or maritime. So is it moist or dry? So that's over the water, right? So I've got to pick one of these two. And is it wet or is it, nope, is it warm or is it cold? So I would pick this one. It's maritime polar. So you've got ocean and you've got cold. Continental polar would be there. Okay. What about this one up here? Could be very confusing on a short answer because you think you already wrote down maritime polar, but you'd write it down again. It's over the ocean and it's cold. Now we're down to the tropics over here. Okay. So we've got maritime tropic because it's over the ocean and it's warm down here. Continental tropic, it's over Mexico, it's dry and it's warm. And then you need one more maritime tropic for here because this is mostly water down here and it's warm. And this Gulf of Mexico region here, that's our usual, most likely source region for the maritime tropic air, and most of our polar air comes from continental polar. Those two meet, and remember, all weather is moving across the country this way. So for New York State, that's why we have these two air masses most often, competing for our attention. Couple straightforward questions. They don't get too tricky with air masses. Geographic area for CP, continental polar. So which one is the continental polar going to be? Continent, land, polar, cold. Bingo. Air mass is MT, maritime tropical. So you need to be really comfortable with those different terms. Maritime, ocean, tropical, warm, warm ocean. Choice D. Type of air mass, low humidity, high temperature. So low humidity is dry, continent. So I'm at one of these two. High temperature, tropical. Geographic region, the source region, most common for maritime tropical. Water, warm water, Gulf of Mexico. So they're pretty straightforward, labeling where they come from. Yuri, where'd you go? Where are you? Oh, there you are, buddy. He's coming back with one more thing. He found from a few videos ago one of the diagrams that we did. So if we were going to label these air masses, here's an air mass. This is the front. Remember, that's a cold front. This is warm air, and this is cool air. So see if you can try to mentally in your head picture where would these air masses, what would they be labeled? Yeah, look, there they are. So, continental polar. The cold air comes from Canada. Because of where we live, it's usually coming from the dry part of Canada. Maritime tropical, usually the source region is the Gulf of Mexico for us. So this is warm air that came in, and then continental polar again. Usually it'll alternate something like this, because as the air keeps coming across the country and meeting up, there's just one air mass after another that are all feeding towards us. So that's why we have a lot of weather events in New York State. And it was not a coincidence, I don't think I mentioned at any point. The first letter is always lowercase and the second letter is always capital. That's just the format that they use